Okay, so hi everyone. It is our immense pleasure to have João Carvalho with us today. João is a PhD candidate at the Institute of Machine Learning at ETH Zürich, and his research is mainly focused on unsupervised machine learning algorithms and their applications to medical data. Before coming to ETH, João did his integrated Bachelor and Masters in Biomedical Engineering in Lisbon. And he is also very actively involved in service work. He has been a curator in a TEDx event. He has been a chair of IEEE student group in Lisbon, and also the co-founder of the Portuguese Biomedical Students Association. So we are very happy to have you with us, João, today. And today I think you will speak about these spatial dependency networks and their applications for medical image segmentation. So both these topics, I think, would be very relevant for us as a group. So very much looking forward to the talk.
Thank you very much for the introduction and thanks for the kind words. I guess I want to have a disclaimer. So this work I'm here to present, part of it was developed by George Miladinovic. He was the original first author for the main paper. I'm going to present his work and the follow-up that I did. So I'm working mostly with contrastive learning approaches in self-supervised learning for medical imaging now, but previously I worked a bit in medical image segmentation, and this is the project that I'm here to present. So let's get to it. Let me see if I can. Okay, so the outline. As I mentioned, I'm going to present two works. The first work is spatial dependency networks. These are neural network layers that were developed specifically for image generation or image generative modeling. I'm going to start by introducing this generative modeling. I want to also motivate a bit the approach and compare it a bit to what's been done previously. And I'll show some results on what were the improvements within the context of image modeling. And then I'll move into the medical imaging image segmentation task and why these spatial dependency networks make sense within the context of image segmentation. And then what's the changes that we had to do to the basic image segmentation architectures, UNets, to make it work. And I'll show some results and I'll finish with just a quick summary and some conclusions. So first of all, spatial dependency networks for image generation. I'm going to start with generative models. What are generative models? And I want to start by setting up the following setting. So we are given collected data, which can be celebrity images, or in this case, also MRI scans of the brain, in this case with a few tumors. And this can be highly complex data. And we'd like to construct a generative model using this data. This generative model would allow us to ideally create samples that look like the ones from the original data. So this is just the generative modeling, and it can be mathematically formulated as by denoting first a random variable x that is sampled from the true PDF of the data. From this distribution, we then collect a few samples. This would be the collected data. And our goal here is from this collected data to construct our probabilistic model, our distribution condition given x, that should closely aim at approximate the true one. So this is the first concept. The second concept that I think it's relevant to understand is, still within the context of generation. Okay, why do we want to do this? The first thing is to do data synthesis. This is the most obvious tool that application that you can use this tool for. In this case, using GPT-3, you can generate sentences. Within the medical domain, this might be interesting to improve the richness of our training data, for instance. We also can do data manipulation, so meaningfully translate the semantics of one image to the other. This might be interesting with within the context of changing the, for instance, the type of data that we're using, maybe changing from MRI to CT scans. We can also do this, use this kind of modeling to improve the resolution of an image. And finally, also interesting within the medical domain, doing anomaly detection. So the second concept that I feel like it's important to understand the motivation for this project is the latent variables. So in latent variable modeling, we get this observed random variable X, but it's supplemented with an non-observable Z latent variable. And the aim of latent variable modeling is to learn this joint probability distribution. Typically, the idea behind latent variables is to create this alternate representation of the data. And this is useful for a series of scenarios. First of all, the latent vector, which not necessarily usually, but ideally should be lower dimensionally, and should encode high-level abstractions of the data, such as shape, size, color of an object. In our case, maybe the features would be different within the context of medical image, but ideally these features can then be used for further downstream tasks like classification or clustering or manipulations for visualization. Yeah. So getting into the image modeling, I want to talk about images as a sequence of pixels. So recent approaches to image modeling in the last few years for image generation have been focusing on autoregressive models. So if you look at an image, it can be actually modeled as a sequence of pixels, where each pixel, for instance, the deep pixel, is dependent on all of the previous pixels that appeared before it. And as it happens, these autoregressive models have been dominating the state of the art in the last few years with respect to the negative log likelihood. But one question arises. Can we, these models don't have latent variables. Can we actually build a variation autoencoder that would use an autoregressive decoder and dropout? Unfortunately, this is extremely hard because these images are high definition images. And in the case of pixel by pixel sampling, this is prohibitively slow. So the motivation for the spatial dependency network is for us to try to construct a non-autoregressive model, for instance, a variational autoencoder that doesn't require an autoregressive decoder, still keeping the latent variables of the model accessible to do both generation and used to downstream tasks. So let's just ask this question: what makes an autoregressive model so performant? And one hypothesis that we took, and why we think this project makes sense, is that when we do this sequential generation procedure, where the neighboring pixels are produced one by one, depending on the neighboring pixels, this sort of introduces an inductive bias to the modeling of our statistical dependencies. So this 2D space that could be only analyzed locally has dependencies that are explored across the full 2D space. In the case of autoregressive modeling, we have these dependencies going row by row. To support this hypothesis, we can look at when we shuffle the pixel generation, we lose the performance of autoregressive models. So autoregressive models are not understanding the structure of the image. They're modeling these dependencies at the local and the distant space. So let's try to do the following. Let's try to perform sequential generation of the latent variables. So we look at the latent space, and in particular in the latent space of duration autoencoder decoder. So instead of using an autoregressive decoder, we'll try to generate the feature vectors one by one. So this way we can try to still inject this inductive bias while ignoring or avoiding this autoregression that makes it prohibitively computationally accessible. So this means that the pixels are now statistically independent, conditioned on the latent variable. So the way that we do this is by introducing these novel neural network layers that perform such a sequential generation procedure. So how do these work? Spatial dependency layers have 3 stages. The first one is the project in stage, the second one is the correction stage, and then we have the project out stage. The first stage takes the feature map and it projects it into a higher dimensional feature map. So we increase the number of channels, and we did do the opposite in the project out stage. The goal here is to increase the number of features so that in the correction stage, where we try to model these dependencies across different directions, we can have enough features to do so. So how do we do this? This is basically 2 affine transformations that are learnable. And then we use an iterative gating update to do this modeling. And this is done with a GRU in our case. So looking at what would be this layer, we have an output here. And looking back at each stage in the correction stage, the feature in the feature map that we're looking will get these dependencies incorporated at each stage. So for the first right to left, and then left bottom to top, left to right, and top to bottom, these dependencies are modeled so that the features can exploit these non-local dependencies. So the final SDN architecture will have 2 main components, 2 additional main components that were needed to change in order to improve the performance. The first one was already an established work which uses an hierarchical structure to the latent feature vector, so hierarchical VAE. And then we also included a CNN layer with some gating to avoid the vanishing gradient problem. Sorry. So for our experiments, we looked at 3 data sets: CIFAR10, ImageNet32, a downsampled version of the ImageNet, and CILAB, which is a high-resolution data set with high-resolution images of faces. And we looked at quantitatively what's the test score for the negative likelihood, and we also looked at qualitatively how these images appear. So first of all, for the quantitative results, I have here the 3 data sets and the methods, and we're looking at the negative log likelihood. As we decrease the negative log likelihood, we approximate our true PDF. So the first comment is autoregressive models with respect to the negative log likelihood still have the state of the art. But the SDN layers, the SDN models, SDN-based variational autoencoders, have the state of the art for all variational autoencoder-based methods, so non-autoregressive models. And at the same time, they beat some of these impressive baselines established by autoregressive models like the Pixel, CNN, and RNN. The last comment is that we also evaluated the comparison between the CNN with our hierarchical VAE, and at the same time, the hierarchical VAE with the SDN layer. And we can see throughout the data sets a decrease in the negative log likelihoods. So looking at the images, let us observe some selected images generated unconditionally from the prior distribution that we established. Here, the point is not to try to convince you that all of the images will be perfect, but it's to prove you that the SDN VAE can already generate realistic images at varying temperatures. These results are an important step in advancing VAEs, as this was one of the first methods which concurrently were architectures developed that achieved these high fidelity pictures. The second thing that we also looked at qualitatively was trying to sample conditionally, so trying to perform image manipulation. Here we encode test images, so the celebrities in the middle, and then sampled from the posterior distribution, we synthesize images that are close by in the learned probabilistic model. So importantly, these figures illustrate that the higher level abstractions are encoded in the top latent layers of the architectural VAE. So as we look at the layers that we keep unchanged, we see that the features, that the changes in the pictures decrease. So higher level features will be encoded by the higher level architecture of our VAE. Okay, let me now move on to the spatial dependency networks now applied to the medical imaging.
Sorry,
do you have a question?
If it's okay, can we ask some questions about the first work now?
Sure. Yeah, maybe it would be easier actually to clarify already some questions. Yes.
Thanks. So I have a question. Can we go back to the slide where you were showing the SDN architecture?
Okay, the architecture. So this.
Yes. So here you said that on the right and the left are two affine layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening exactly in the middle layer?
So this correction stage, I have the algorithm is better described in the paper. What we're trying to do is we look at the feature and we try each pixel, we can think of pixel, would have a feature vector associated with it, which is, if you look at convolutional neural networks, this would be the number of channels. This would be defining the size of the feature vector. And then you can think of this as sequence modeling. So we have an LSTM that tries to predict how to model these features in these directions. So for this particular feature vector, we look at all of the feature vectors in the directions that come previously, and we do this modeling directionally. This is why we say it's an iterative gating update, because we use these GRU architectures to do this modeling.
I see. So in this sense, but the whole thing is trained using the variational inference framework, right? So
because you can still do the backpropagation.
So because of this sequence, so this LSTM type architecture in between, each pixel has the chance to look at all the pixels that came before it. And
directionally, not necessarily before. We can map these in all of the 4 directions. Ideally, it could also be done diagonally. We haven't that implemented, but for each pixel, you look at the part before and the part afterwards. And these dependencies is what we believe create this, introduce this inductive bias on the statistical modeling.
Okay. And these SDNs go between all layers of the decoder of the VAE. Where do they go?
Yeah, in the decoder. In this case, in the decoder. In the follow-up work, we also put them on the encoder.
I see. So between every 2 layers, we have, or you have one SDN layer, right? Between every 2 convolutional layers, you have one SDN layer.
Exactly.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Should I move on to the next project, or are there any other questions?
Can I ask a question?
I can't hear you too well, but yes, you can.
Okay, can I ask a question?
I think George Brunner was trying to ask a question, but I can't really hear you.
Does it work better now?
Now it works, yes.
Okay. Sorry. So I think you're saying like in one layer of these SDN layers, it sort of has a receptive field over the whole image, right? Because it really takes, I think this also you said in the paper. But
Yeah,
then
go ahead.
The receptive field is sort of over the whole image, because like you have to transport like in a recurrent setting all this information through the pixels. And I was wondering if you could sort of, I guess at some point this influence sort of saturates, right? I guess. And then I was wondering if you could maybe visualize something like an attention net where, yeah,
I guess
something,
we don't,
that.
By using these sort of LSTM architectures, GRU architectures, we induce this memory on the dependencies. So longer distances will have less impact on the feature that you're looking at. So this also kind of makes sense. I don't really understand the modeling. I have a few pictures on the segmentation that might clarify a bit this on the receptive field. Maybe there it will be clear.
Okay, thanks.
Should I move on now? Okay. So I can just, okay. So first of all, trying to motivate this these spatial dependency networks within the context of the segmentation task. So I looked at this as there's two main benefits that translate to the medical segmentation. First of all is the spatial coherence, as local features will have a contribution stronger to this modeling. This kind of modeling doesn't really happen in a convolutional layer. This also makes sense within a segmentation. So closer features should be, the mapping to the segmentation masks should be spatially coherent. And the second thing is this long-range dependencies that never are used in convolutional layers unless the receptive field for that specific pixel includes those features in the original image. And looking a bit into the images themselves. So why is this meaningful for medical images? First of all, I think for anatomical structures, this could be considered as structures that are guided by the overall disposition of the organs. So the lungs will be always between, with the heart between them, and you'll have the left lung and the right lung. So this sort of already disposition of the structures can be useful to model the segmentations. Furthermore, just looking at the local features and trying to leverage on this concept of coherence or spatial coherence, the local features are organized at the tissue level. So they share many textual and structural similarities at that level that can then be exploited and modeled when trying to perform the segmentation. And by using these SDNs, we enforce these relationships. For abnormal structures like polyps in the colon, these structures might keep this local coherence of the features that they're using, but also by looking at the global overall look of the image, maybe there's features in other parts of the image that can be also exploited to perform this segmentation. So looking at the receptive field, and I guess this kind of goes a bit into the question that was asked. So when we look at the receptive field for this pixel in blue, if we only use convolutional layers with max pooling, The K here would be the size of the kernel used for the max pooling or the average pooling, the pooling that you use. The receptive field would be this square center around the pixel. If we look at what these SDN layers do for the modeling of the pixel, all of these dependencies are already made at the layer level. So when we look back at the original input image, for this specific pixel, the modeling looks at all of the directions with a lot more space. And if you look only at the layer level, so for the single layer, for this pixel, this is the modeling that is done. So the modeling will look at directionally up and down, so Y and X axis, and it will have this modeling already incorporated in the statistical modeling. So how did we implement this? Our goal here was to compare these spatial dependency networks with some baselines. And for that, we looked at UNet, which it's the go-to network for medical image segmentation. And we went for also the UNet++, which is this sort of multi-level concatenation and also feature translation between levels that tries to merge to improve the merging of the features in a more coherent way. And there's 2 or 3 points that I want to make on the way that we did this. So the first thing that we did was besides including the spatial dependency layers on the decoder, we also put them on the encoder. And our reasoning for this is that the modeling of these dependencies can already start on the feature extraction, on the feature modeling, when we have the encoding of the features. The second thing that we also did was we have these convolutional layers followed by the spatial dependency layer. We don't need to, so at each level we have 2 operations or two neural network layers, and we only put the spatial dependency layer after a single convolutional layer. So we don't need to have two levels of spatial dependency layers. The last thing is that we also had to include the gating mechanism using a CNN, so residual STN layers to avoid vanishing gradients. So moving on to the experiments, we looked at 3 data sets. The first one is nuclei of images of cells in images, and this was extracted from the data science bowl. We looked at polyps from colonoscopy images from the endoscopic vision MICI 2015, and also at liver images, liver CT scans from the LITS data set. For the second 2 data sets, we did some downsampling to facilitate the computational requirements. So we performed 5-fold cross-validation on these data sets. I guess this table is not the original one that you see in the paper. This is some results that we got a few weeks afterwards. And we see a general increasing trend from UNet-based models, so both UNet and UNet++ models, to the SDN-based models. So this happens for both nuclei, polyps, and liver datasets, but the results are a bit more interesting when you look at the polyps and the liver datasets. Here we get an average increase of 6.98 dice across from the UNet-based models to the STN-based models, and a 5.5 dice gain from the UNet-based models to the STN-based models. I think it's also interesting to note that just the UNet with the spatial dependency layers outperforms in our study the UNet++. across the different tasks. So we also looked at what here's the main contributions to these results. And we first looked at the number of spatial dependencies here, just in the encoder. So as we increase the number of layers in the encoder, we see an upward trend on the performance. This makes sense because we are increasing the modeling of our 2D space. So for the number of channels, this goes back to the project in stage, where we map from a lower number of channels to a higher number of channels. And as we increase this number of channels, we see that there's a slight increase on the performance, but it saturates around 200 channels. For the number of directions, I feel this is interesting to look at. There's, in general, as we increase the number of directions, the method becomes more performant, but there's directions that contribute, or the increase is not just linear. So this leads us to believe that there's directions that contribute more than others. Here, if we look at the axes that are considered, so if we compare the UNet to the STUNet with only the X, you see an higher increase, or an increase for both of the data sets. But then when we compare this to only the Y-axis, we see that for polyps, there's not such an increase. It might be because this kind of structures has no none of these directions contribute specifically to the modeling. Just the overall 2D modeling helps. But when you look at the liver segmentation, where we have a structure that in the coronal cuts has more preponderance in the Y-axis, the Y-axis contributes more than the X-axis. And then when we use both directions, the scores improve with respect to just one direction. So some qualitative results. These images are downsampled. That's why the resolution is not so high. But there's two comments that I find interesting to make. First of all, for the polyp segmentation, this was an example that we found. When we compare the spatial dependency networks to the with the baselines, we see that this blob here appears. So let me clarify first, sorry. Here we have the original image. The white is the ground truth mask with all of the voxels or pixels that were correctly identified. The red one is the false positives, and the blue ones are the false negatives. So pixels that should have been predicted as masks, as part of the mask, but failed to do so. And here, what we notice is from the UNet to the spatial dependency net, this blob here kind of disappears. One explanation that I found is that, so if feature, on all of the images from this data set, there was only one polyp across the data, across the images. So I guess this modeling of the two-dimensional space looks as if there's another polyp, there are features that should be classified as polyp. This kind of modeling tells the model not to predict this as being classified as polyps. This can be good or bad, but I can believe this to be one of the explanations why the spatial dependency layers improve here. And here we see that the number of false negatives also decreases when we have this the introduction of the spatial dependency layers. And I guess it also has to do with this modeling of the longitudinal direction and overall the directions. Yeah. So some conclusions that I want to draw or summarize. So STNs were motivated as VAEs that are able to model these dependencies within the context of image generation. And this IAF STN was able to achieve state-of-the-art non-autoregressive results for methods that are non-autoregressive. And within the context of medical imaging, we try to motivate the usage of SDN layers within the medical image segmentation task. And we try to claim that this 2D modeling is what improves the performance. And then we introduce the spatial dependency to the units, and we call them spatial dependent units. And we show through our experiments that they improve comparatively to baseline models. And some last slides, if you want to use any of these SDN layers, you just need to replace conv2D and SDN layer. So it should be really straightforward. There's some optimizations, but this is the main thing to do. And thank you. If you have any questions, we can follow up.
Thank you very much, João. Are there any questions in the group?
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi, thanks for the talk. My question is, how does the number of parameters or the optimization time changes when you add these layers? And the second question is, you never mentioned like adversarial models, so are they not on par with state-of-the-art in generative image modeling, or am I maybe not too well versed about this?
Okay, so yeah, I could have talked about that. In this case, the number of parameters is similar to what we did in the autoregressive case. I also tried to do the analysis. I didn't include this in even in the appendix, but in the paper for the segmentation of medical images, I have in the appendix the size of the models.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so it's bigger, right?
It's slightly bigger, but that's not the main difference, I guess. The number of parameters shouldn't be isn't the limitation. The problem is the computational time. So doing this this optimization step, the correction stage, it's expensive computationally. The algorithm itself is ON, but still with a number of iterations, but it's still expensive. So that was one of the main drawbacks of using this. But I guess it also we can also claim that CNNs are some of the most optimized layers that you can use. In our case, from PyTorch. These SDN layers are not so optimized right now. So I guess in the future, if these optimizations are done and we can exploit better some code, I guess this wouldn't impact as much. For the second question, so there's a difference between just image generation and this is density estimation, and I guess you can't do the same comparison for these kinds of methods. So density estimation, you try to learn the distribution. You're not just trying to learn how to sample image or how to generate images. You don't use just a generator architecture. It's also relevant to have the estimation of the data set.
Okay.
Okay. I hope I answered the question.
So basically, if I understood correctly, means that with adversarial methods, they are implicitly learning the distribution, so you cannot get log likelihood estimates from them. Whereas in the methods that you're using, you can, and that has advantages.
That has advantages, and even within the ones that you can learn the distribution, if you don't have access to these latent variables, you can't really do all of these other tasks that I feel like are part of what motivates this work. So we're interested in data generation, but we're also interested in doing this sort of sampling or conditional sampling. So if you want to do style transfer, or if you want to do classification or clustering, and I feel like the value comes from there. In the original paper on spatial dependency networks, there was also a study on the disentanglement of these features. And it's also interesting to see that these dependencies also improve with respect to that.
Can I ask an additional question?
Yeah, of course.
Does it also help in terms of like these models are known to give high log likelihood values to images or whatever coming not from the distribution? Are you familiar with what I'm trying to say?
I guess I know about the problem. The thing is, I'm not an expert in this area, so I work with VAs, but I'm not sure if I could explain that actually.
I see. No, I was just going to ask if you did any experiments with like feeding in out of distribution data and looking at the log likelihood values, if it is helpful or not.
I guess George, the one that developed these spatial dependency layers, he also used this for anomaly detection for EEGs. So he was extracting features using these spatial dependency networks, because he mapped this to a spectrogram. And there he did this, applied this to anomaly detection. And I guess this goes a bit into hand to what you're saying. So if we use images from outside of the distribution of the sampled images that we use for the training of the algorithm, we can actually detect these outliers.
Yeah, well, cool. Thank you very much. Is that paper published with the EEG spectrograms or?
I don't think so, but I guess the thesis should be available.
Okay.
He just graduated this year.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I have another question about. I think if you can mute me. There. Yeah. Hi. Sorry, 1 second. So about the. Sorry, I'm distracted by hearing my own voice, but I'll try to. Yeah, now it's good. What was the question?
There's also a question on the chat, I guess. Yeah, that wasn't intended. The question in the chat. Let me try to find the chat again. So that the liver were upside down in the picture. It wasn't intended.
Okay, and I remembered my question now. It was about the computational time. So you said that the training time increases, but if I recall correctly, in autoregressive models, the test time is also very hard. So if you want to sample images, it takes a long time because you always sample 1 pixel at a time. Do these methods also have a similar problem or no? No.
No. So inference time, it's extremely quickly. So there's two. I try to look at this at 3 stages, 3 types of computational or time frames. So if you look at the inference stage, it's when you have the trained model and you see if the prediction is fast or slow. This has almost 0 increase in the inference stage. And I guess autoregressive models don't have that because the modeling is done exponentially, increases in complexity exponentially. So the last pixel will look at all of the pixels beforehand. For the other 2 are you do the training of the method, and it can take less epochs to converge, but the epochs might take longer. So what we noticed here was the model converges faster, so it takes less epochs to converge on average, but the epochs take longer. So this is the computational cost that I try to introduce a bit, and I think it doesn't make it prohibitively. So I think the network that I trained that took the longest was a few hours, but some of these models take full days to train in different settings. A UNet is extremely fast to train when we do it in these 2D images, but still.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And sorry, one more question I have about, so one of the recurring themes of the paper is that the model is able to better capture spatial dependencies, right? Spatial coherence, because of effectively these large receptive fields in particular directions, right? Now, another way of doing this would be to increase the size of the convolutional kernel, and one could do it also in particular directions if one wanted to. Is there, yeah, do you have any comments on how this would fare as compared to that? Or
I guess there's a few things that I can say about that. So first of all, I try to make the difference between receptive field and accessible modeling at the layer stage. So the receptive field is looking at the input image, what for the feature that we have in the end, what are the input pixels or voxel that this pixel depends upon. And we see that by having this increased modeling at a layer level, we get an increase of the receptive field. So this is one of the arguments. The second argument is that at the layer level, when you look, we already have the feature map, and we are trying to model these dependencies. A convolutional kernel will look at the local features, and you can have a 3x3, a 5x5, or 8x8, or I don't think no one does that larger than that. It captures only that snap of the features, and the next value of the feature will be condensing the information of these 3 to 6 or 9 to 12 or 18 pixels. But if we look at the SDN layers, what we're doing is for that specific pixel, we first do the translation, so the fine transformation to increase the size of the feature space, and then we're doing this modeling across these directions. So we are effectively incorporating all of these features, information of these features, to model the value of that feature in the next layer. So I think this is actually the thing that gives the most value, because when we look at these recent works on multi-scale image classification or image segmentation, where you have a small patch and increasingly larger patches of an image, and they use this information to do the prediction, I guess they're trying to mix this information, but it's still a kind of a patchy approach. And in our case, this is a directional approach that does a larger modeling, and the method itself can be scaled up. So in this case, we're doing the modeling with 2 to 4 directions, but you can effectively do this modeling across all of the directions of an image. It was a bit, if this was not clear, I can go again.
so by 2 to 4, you mean up, down, right, left, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And by more, you mean you can consider diagonal directions.
Exactly. And if you scale this to 3-dimensional, you can do this with all of the directions.
So the other way would be to have a convolutional kernel which has the same size as the feature size, which would be way too many parameters. That would effectively be fully connected layer. I see. And here you're able to get those dependencies with much fewer parameters, right?
Fewer parameters, and the modeling, I guess, is smarter because you're using these gated units, which take into account the distance, the effective distance of the features. So we also learn this modeling.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. No, I understand. It's very clever. Thank you.
Can you show again this picture where there was this graph with the green, where you explained this? Yeah, this This fairness.
Okay.
Thanks. So here it looks like these arrows, if I look at the green dot, these arrows, they really come from more than only this stripe. You know,
Okay,
like, so
yeah.
with this picture, I thought that with 4 directions, I would actually cover already dependencies from all over the image. So this is not the case, you're saying?
The thing is, this is a 4x4 map. And when we do this, we have a 3x3 kernel that does this mapping. So I think this is a bit misleading.
Okay.
The image that I think clarifies this a bit should be this one. So here I have the original pixel or voxel, and we have this kernel, the kernel size, and it looks at these directions. So this is the effective dependency space or dependency map at the layer level.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Nice.
Thank you.
Are there more questions? If not, I would like to thank João once again for the very nice talk and for answering all the questions. Thank you very much. Very interesting work.
Thanks a lot for, I guess, the original invitation, and also accepting this change. I had a lot of fun with it. I always love these discussions.
Great. I mean, we are trying to have these talks from time to time. So if you're interested in other talks also, please feel free to join.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.